Hi, good evening. Today is November 10th, 2025, and it is 7:50 p.m. U.S. Central Time. My name is Rinaldo J. Aguiar Marcano, and I'm recording this video from my home located at the 2302 Britton Ridge Drive, Katy, Texas 77494. And this house is located in a neighborhood called, a gated community called Lake Point Estates. And um, this home is located in front of the house of Joel Great, who is the Chief Financial Officer of Baxter International. And that is very relevant to this conversation. And also, both our homes are located 300 feet away from the house of Robert Mueller, the former director of the FBI. Also very relevant to this conversation. So tonight, and I apologize for the face. It's been a long day. I had to go to court twice today, and I'm gonna tell you a little bit about why. But it was an interesting day. So yeah, so this is gonna be a very short session, and the goal is to pass a couple of tips that I got from the Venezuelan informant. And remember, this is a person that claims to work closely with Diosdado Cabello. I've never met him in person, but that's what he says, right? And so far, he has given me information that I would say have saved my life multiple times. So could be valuable tips. I don't know, right? Now I have to say I don't. So this information, of course, is unverified. I don't have the means or the capacity to verify these things. It's something that if authorities investigate this thing, they should probably look into these things, right? Because they could yield valuable leads. But I don't know, right? And I don't know. This is a question I can ask myself, right? Like the question is, say that the informant gives me a tip, right? And I publish it, and like I don't know what is the threshold for authorities for something to be considered probable cause, right? To, for example, get, I don't know, some kind of permission from a judge to inquire or to look into something. Like I don't know, right? Um, I have no way to calibrate that, right? I've tried to build models for those legal concepts, but they're such loose concepts that I haven't been able to get to a reliable model so far on that. Um, you're gonna see why I'm saying this right in a minute. So yeah, let me start with the tips to get that out of the way, right? So tip number one was about the mysterious index number 7. So that is the temporary restraining order that Morgan Heibner obtained, probably. Like we don't know because it's missing from the docket, right? I'm talking about the family court case. So that family court case, index number 7, is gone. And when I went to court today, the first time in the morning, I went to the clerk's office and I asked for a copy of that document, and the clerk told me, I mean, the person that works at the clerk's office. I talked to the supervisor actually, and she told me that the document was missing from the index. It's not there, and she has no way to find it. So she confirmed that the document is missing, right? She has no way to find that document. So we don't know, right? We don't know what is Morgan Heibner is holding secretly. But what the informant told me is that in that index number 7 document, that is the flexible weapon that Morgan Heibner created, right, in April, there were provisions about what do they call that? Injunctions, right? Like things that you're prevented from doing. And she put some things in there, some language, saying that I could not incur in expenses that were unnecessary, that were not living expenses, right? And he told me that that's the reason why in the hearing of September 8th, she asked me a series of questions about my business expenses. And I described this in a previous demo before, that I thought it was ridiculous, right? Like, what business does she has asking me, if how much money I'm spending on marketing the books, for example, or, translating the book into different languages, things like that. Like, I thought it was, but he told me that the reason is that what she was creating was a record to then uh, file a motion for contempt, because she has this order that says that I could not spend money on anything that was not necessary living expenses. And by me saying on the record that I was spending, I think it was, I don't know, 20 something thousand dollars, right? 20,000 and something that I spent during a period of time that I was translating the books to, I think, 28 languages, which, if you think about it, is very efficient. Like, I'm saying that it costed me less than $1,000 per language, right? And we're talking about a book that is almost 1,000 pages long, right? It's because I'm doing it with software, right? Like, I'm doing these translations, I'm not using human translators, right? That's why I can do it so cheaply. But anyhow, so yeah, so the power of the TRO is that she could put me potentially even in jail, right? With contempt, like by filing a motion for contempt, because I said on the record that I spent, but of course, like, it would be, I mean, that she can do it, right? Because obviously she can do anything, right? Like, she can file documents and get signatures on things and that don't even exist, right? She can file documents with titles that don't represent what the document says, right? Like, she can do anything. Like, there's no limits for what she can do. There's no law really for Morgan Heibner or for Troy Pickett. But that was the plan, right? That was the weapon, right? So that's why she was asking me those questions. So the informant told me that that document contains those things. Now that we're talking about that mysterious document, he told me that he hasn't been able to get a definitive answer on whether it was sent to Tesla corporate or legal department or not. Like, he hasn't been able to get me a definitive confirmation of whether that was the case. But he told me that he thinks it was the case. Now, that's an interesting point, because in terms of, and I'm talking more now about the potential for fraud, right? Wire fraud charges, right, on the federal jurisdiction. That is an interesting thing, because they did remove the car from my Tesla account. I mean, in terms of fraud, like, what I'm going to tell you, I'm seeing this in the pipeline, like in the debug output, and it's a software system. It's not 100%, right? Like, some of the things that I'm going to say may not be completely accurate, but from what I'm seeing, it seems like the conditions that need to be met are the existence of a scheme to defraud, the intention to defraud, right, and the use of electronic communication or wires. So yeah, so the scheme, the intention, I think at least one occurrence, right? So the Tesla is interesting because they did remove the car from my account. So in practical purposes, they did deprive me from the property. They did deprive me from the ownership of the car, which I paid for the car, right? So in a way, they did perfect the crime with the Tesla, right? And again, using fraud, a fraudulent document, right? Why is it fraudulent? Because the order is not real. They didn't file it. They didn't, they didn't serve it to me. I never got that order, right? And it's missing from the docket. But then they sent it to Tesla to deceive Tesla into depriving me from the use and possession and ownership of the car. With the end goal of that wasn't really to steal the car, was that I could not locate my son. Because if I know where my son is, I'm not going to be put under stress. And they wanted to produce psychological stress with the kidnapping. So the kidnapping is not effective if I know the child is 3 miles away, right? Even if I can't see him, it's not the same effect. Imagine, right? Imagine if you didn't know where your son or daughter is for 50 consecutive days. You have no idea if your child is 5 miles or 5,000 miles away. You have no idea if they ate, if they, nothing, right? The psychological stress that that produces is immense. And if I had a way to track the car, I wouldn't be on that. I mean, I would be sad because I cannot be with him, right? Of course. But at least I would know where he is, right? I would have an idea geographically where he is. And they couldn't let that be the case because they needed to maximize the torture, right? The psychological torture to subdue me into submission, right? So that's why they needed to steal the car with that fraud, right? But they used the electronic communication system because they had to send that to Tesla electronically, right? And Tesla it's a multinational corporation, right? It's not a locally owned mom and pop shop. So it would also, that type of communication, if they did send that document electronically or using wires of any kind, because of the multinational nature of the company itself, it would qualify probably, right? So the car is very interesting for that reason. And that makes locating that document very important. And that's probably the reason why they can't, let anybody see that document. Right? Because those conditions are probably in the index number 7, not in the index number 8. That they did that it's the officially filed document, right? Like that they were going to swap under the hood if or when they need it, right? So yeah, it seems to me like speaking to Tesla, and this is what I was saying at the beginning, right? I don't know if a tip from if this unverified information from a Venezuelan informant. I mean, he's very high profile, right? Because he is close to Diosdado Cabello. But I don't know if that alone would be probable cause strong enough as to, get a court order to get this document from Tesla, right? I don't know the answer to that, right? But putting together what the informant told me and what I see in the pipeline in terms of the liability scenarios that I'm running, it seems like that index number 7 document it could be a very powerful weapon, right, for prosecutors, right? Now, so that was one thing, right? Uh, the injunctions, right? That was the word, right? So, and by the way, I have to say, like that thing about making those injunctions, saying that I could not spend money on anything, right? It's a form of censorship, really, right? That's what it is. So if I spend any money on the company, which is a company that publishes the books, then Morgan Heiner will try to get me found in contempt and put in jail, right? So if you look at it objectively, what it is if you keep working on the books, you could be put in jail. I mean, it's the communist definition of censorship, right? If you write a book that talks about the government, you're put in jail, right? So that's what it really was. Which is interesting on itself, right? It's like that thing that I say sometimes, right? When you see the creation, you recognize. When you see the thing, right? When you see the features of a thing, you sometimes can recognize the features of the creator. Right? I think that's what this is. Right. So now the second information I'm gonna tell you the information, and it's gonna sound a little bit weird, but you're gonna see why it's relevant, right? But I'm gonna tell you the tip first. Okay, the tip is that Pickett was today, November 10th, 2025, very close, physically close to the court during different times in the day. And you may say, well, why is that, a tip? Like he's a lawyer. He could be next. I'm going to tell you why, right? So last night, in the afternoon, I don't recall the time, but the informant gave me a couple of heads ups, right? Like he gave me the heads up on a couple of things. One was that the network was going to shoot down my, I don't know what's the word for that, but like sabotage in a way, right? My Tesla. They were going to shut it off remotely with, I don't know, some mechanism they have. I don't know exactly how it works, right? Speaking of which, there was another tip related to the Tesla. Yes, this is an important one. I'll tell you. I'll finish this one. I'll tell you the other one. Um, so yeah, so they were going to interfere with the car while I was on my way to court, right? The reason is because I was supposed to go today to court for a hearing that was in the docket, right? And maybe this is a good point. Let me show you, just so you can see. You can see this visually, right? Just one second. Okay. Um, no, it doesn't want to work. You see? Okay. So let's look at the docket again. Oh, okay. So this would be here. Okay. So see this entry of 1110 that says temporary orders hearing. You see that, right? So this was the entry that was created on September 11 to reassess the temporary orders that were verbally rendered on September 11 because the orders had a duration of 60 days. And if you do the math, the 60 days expired today, November 10th. Right? So that's why we had that hearing. But this hearing is interesting because you see it says 9 a.m., okay? And it says that it's with judicial officer Telfair Oscar III. But below it says 2 hours, and then it says 1:30 p.m. So it has two contradictory times, right? 9 a.m. and 1:30 p.m. Right. Also, well, I'll show you that in a minute, right? But so it has two times in the docket, right? So of course the question was in my mind, at what time should I go, right? But in these kind of things, particularly when you have an adversary this sophisticated and with this level of malice, you have to always assume the worst, right? So I went at 9 a.m. In fact, I arrived at 8:30, right? In case they did something in the way or something. So the informant told me that the idea was that they were going to make me late or not go, right? And that's why they put the 2 times. So if I had gone at 9 a.m., they would have the hearing at 1:30 p.m. And if I got at 1:30 p.m., they would have the hearing at 9 a.m. So whenever I was not in the courtroom, they will start the hearing. And they will say that I did not appear for the hearing, and they will enter a default judgment in my absence. Right? And that default judgment would justify the unjustifiable. All the things and all the mistakes that they've made, they would fix them with this new order. Right? So the informant told me last night, in the evening, I can't recall the time, that they were going to shut down the car. So, in the worst case, they had planned to shut down the Tesla when I was in the highway, supposedly, right? Or, when I was on my way to the court. So I could not arrive. And then they would execute these rules. Of course, what I did this morning, I switched cars, right? And I didn't take the Tesla. I took the Armor car, which is an older vehicle. It's 2011. It has less electronics, right? The Tesla is a computer on wheels, right? They can turn that thing off by software. The Suburban, they can do that, right? So that's how I disabled that rules, but they had already that plan. So I get to the court, 8:30. I waited. I go into the courtroom. The Troy Pickett is not there. Morgan Hagner is not there, and the petitioner is not there. The judge is calling the dockets in the morning, right? He calls my case, and I stand up and I say, Judge, I'm here because this is in the docket, but I'm not here to respond to a hearing because there's an automatic stay on the case, so I object to this hearing, right? Because the court lacks jurisdiction at this moment over this case, because we're waiting for the motion to recuse to be ruled on. To which the judge says, your hearing is at 1:30 p.m. This is interesting and alarming at the same time. First, I just said to the judge respectfully that there's an automatic stay on the case, and he ignored that. I objected to the hearing. He ignored that again, ignored my objection, my verbal objection, and proceeded to tell me that the hearing was on at 1:30. But it's also contradictory, because if the hearing is in the afternoon, why is it being mentioned in the docket call of the morning? And if the docket call in the morning is a necessary step to have the hearing, why wasn't the petitioner and Troy Pickett or Morgan Hagner present? It just doesn't make sense. Right? I mean, in any way you look at it, there's something deeply contradictory here. But I'm not going to argue with the judge, right? And the judge told me, wait a minute. After the docket call, approach and we'll talk, right? Which is also inappropriate, because there's an automatic stay on the case. The judge cannot be inviting me to talk, and particularly ex parte, like the other party is not present, right? So the whole thing seemed to me like a dangerous legal situation, right? Like if I start talking to the judge, I could be in a way waiving the automatic stay, right? By just engaging with him, right? I mean, it could be constructed in that way. It could be constructed as, I'm waiving the right that I have to the automatic stay because I am engaging, right? So I didn't do that. Instead, I talked with the court coordinator. Interestingly, while I was talking with the court coordinator, and I already filed all this in the court, right? It's filed. But when I was talking with her, the judge asked her if she needed the bailiff. The bailiff is the police officer that is in the courtroom that arrests people if they misbehave, right? I was just asking the question to the coordinator, but what time was the hearing? Because it said 9 a.m. and 1:30 p.m. in the same entry. I thought it was uncalled for, the offer to bring police intervention, because I was asking a question to the coordinator, which is her job, right? Particularly knowing that I have made clear that they're harassing me with the police, right? Because I filed those allegations in federal court, and then while I file in federal court, I come and file those as notices in the family court. So they must know, right, that I made these claims. So I don't know. It felt like an act of intimidation, to be honest. But anyhow, the scheduler tells me, okay, I'm going to mark your case so it's passed, right? And I ask her, but can you remove it from the docket? Or can you mark it as canceled? Can you create a new entry? Just so I'm sure that I have no legal risk here, because otherwise these people could come at 1:30 and they could have this hearing and enter a default judgment. And she tells me, no, I can't do that because I'm not a judge. I don't have the power to make anything on the docket. Right? I said, okay, fine. So I came back home and I filed everything that happened into a new supplemental filing. And then, of course, I went back at 1:30, right? Again on the Suburban. Why? Because Troy Pickett could appear at 1:30, and the judge already said that the hearing was at 1:30, right? So they could say you showed up at the wrong time. The hearing always was at 1:30, and you didn't follow the rules and blah blah blah. And here's your default judgment, right? So I didn't want to take that chance, right? So I went back at 1:30. But when I went back at 1:30, something interesting happened, right? So the whole situation made me curious, and because of what the Venezuelan informant told me, right? And when there's like a board where they have all the cases, it looks like an airport display, right? And it had my name. So this photo was taken in the afternoon at 1:05 p.m. And you can see that it says my name. Let me see if I can put the here, right? And this 3H is a courtroom of Judge Telfair, the 387th. And you see that it says 9 a.m. So the real time was 9 a.m. So I was at the right time. The ones that failed to appear were Morgan Heibner and Pickett. But they failed to appear because I appeared, right? If I had not appeared, they would have shown up and have the hearing. And if I had not appeared at 1:30, they would have come at 1:30 and have the hearing. So that's what the informant told me, right? That they were waiting for an opportunity in which I wasn't present. And then at either one of these times, if this happened, they would have the hearing and they would enter the default judgment. So I mean, that's very interesting, right? Right. So that's why he put me on alert that Troy Pickett was somewhere close to the courthouse today, but he wasn't in the courthouse. Like he was close by. He was ready to come in if he was given the signal, basically, right? And this is one of the reasons why I don't know if a tip like this from an unverified informant, regardless of how high level he claims to be, like I don't know, but I don't know if an anonymous tip like that could be probable cause for example, the FBI to look into the GPS location of Pickett's phone. I don't know. Like, I don't know the answer to that. But if the legal frameworks allowed for that, it would be a good way to know if that was true or not, right? Because if he was near to the courthouse, but wasn't really in the courthouse, and specifically at these times, while he didn't really show up for the court times that were in the docket, it's circumstantial, but it could be evidence, right? That there was design to further the fraud, right? The fraud scheme that they have going on with these courts, and for example, to deprive me from the Tesla and remove it from my account, or to make demands for payment based on a fraudulent court order that they know is a fraud. Right? That fraud was committed for that order to exist in the fraudulent form that it exists. So those were the two interesting tips. The other tip that I've received the other day, and I don't know, I'm gonna mention, I have some experiments that I'm gonna run that I have designed, but I haven't been able to, I haven't had a chance to do it. But I'm gonna give you the information in case it helps, right? So in one of the demos before, I mentioned about the observation of the infrared transmitter in the black Tesla that was transmitting signals, pulsating signals, and there's a video on YouTube that shows this to Joel Gray's house in front of my house, right? And at some point, I asked a question to myself. I wondered, how is that this infrared, light was able to go out from the windshield when I experimented with other cameras, and if you put them behind a window, the infrared light reflects back, blinding the camera, right? So it seemed like there could have been design behind that. So when I made that comment, I think like 2 days after, the informant gave me a couple of tips. He told me that this is not a new device that they had in there, that this is really the same LiDAR or LiDAR, I don't know how to pronounce it, right? Like, so the laser sensors and that these cars have to do 3D mapping of the space, right? So what he told me was that what they did is that they repurposed that hardware and they made a software update on the car, like a custom, and this, according to the informant, this was done by the Chinese intelligence team, working in cahoots with the Venezuelans, right? With the 7 that are operating illegally here in Haiti, including Andres Salvador Mendez. Right? So what they did is that the Chinese intelligence did a software update on the car to hijack the LiDAR and use the LiDAR, light emitting LED, to transmit in a pulsating form that could be decoded. And this works because the windshield of the Tesla is designed to let pass. It's like a pass-through. It's a pass-through object, right, for that frequency of LiDAR. And it was designed that way so the LiDAR could work. So he gave me that tip, right, that what they did in terms of that was really a software update, and it was done by the Chinese intelligence. Now, I don't know if they jailbroke the OS of the car or if they have some secret powers, right? Because let me tell you what I mean. These cars are like an iPhone in a way, right? Like the operative system of the car is locked down. Like you own the car, but you cannot, modify the software. Like even if you are, a super bright software engineer, the OS of the car has protections that makes it impossible for you to modify things inside of the OS. Unless one of the two following conditions happen. One is that you have a superior level of access than anybody else within Tesla. Like, for example, if Tesla gives you the facilities or the codes or whatever it is that you need to be able to get this privileged access to the car, like the same level of access that a Tesla engineer would have, right? That is one way. The second way, and there are some people, there's videos on YouTube of people that do this, right? You can jailbreak the car. The same way that you could unlock an iPhone with a special software and jailbreak it, you could also jailbreak the Tesla, right? But it's a tedious and complex process. Like I haven't tried to do it because if I do it and I mess up, I will end up without the car, right? And I needed to do the things I'm doing. But it's an interesting question, right? How did they modify that software, right? Is it because the Chinese intelligence have an engineering team that is so superior that can defeat Tesla's, software policies? It's possible. Or is it that somebody within Tesla gave them access? Right? I don't know. But this, when I thought, and I'm sorry for telling you this here, it wasn't my intention really. I had designed a session to talk about this, but now that I'm here, I'm going to tell it to you. I'm going to say to you. There is an important step in in this reverse engineering thing that I do, right? When I'm debugging and reverse engineering what they do. And that important step, I call it packaging. Okay. And what it means is that once I have figured out a way to do it, whatever it is that I'm trying to do, right? Like, for example, say that I'm trying to listen with a super ear, right? The first step, and this is my process, right? There might be other people that does it differently, right? But this is something that I see that I do repeatedly, and it seems to work very well, right? When I do it, it always yield excellent results. Maybe it's just I get lucky. I don't know, right? But at least to me, this seems to work. So the first step is, of course, getting an idea what is that they're doing, what they're doing, right? And then replicate it. But after you replicate it, after you get the thing, your prototype, let's call it a prototype, you get it working. The next thing that I do is that I move it intentionally to a different setup. And for example, that's the reason why the cold mobile is at version 7, right? Because I've done 7 iterations of this process. I've moved the equipment 7 times to different cars. That's the reason why I was at this home and I went to Valleyside, because I wanted to test my setup there. But then after I saw that I had dominated that area, I took my improved setup and I brought it here. And now I'm back here. Why? Because I'm testing that improved setup against Robert Mueller and against, the Chinese that I have next door, right? Sorry. So this process, I call it packaging, right? Maybe there's a better name. But the idea is that you take your setup and you try to move it completely to a completely different scenario. And in this process, you will find challenges. How do I say this? You will face challenges that you would need to overcome to be able to industrialize your solution, which is exactly what the network does in everything, right? Like including the lawfare, right? Like you see the TTPs that they have and the tricks that they do. Those things are TTPs because they're needed. They need that level of standardization for industrialization. See? So when I move things around, I face difficulties. Why? Well, because, for example, in the case of the cars, right? So the SUV is tall. The Tesla is small, is lower, right? The shape of the roof, like the SUV is flat, the Tesla is curved. Like all these little details make it so that you have to come up with ways to adapt. But you cannot be adapting as one-offs, right? Like you will see quickly that the only way that you can keep moving it is if you make it in a way that it's easily generalizable, right? I'm telling you this story because when the informant told me about the windshield and the lidar being repurposed for this, and the windshield being designed from the beginning to let pass this frequency of laser, that immediately brought me that question to my mind, right? Because when I see what they're doing with the cameras that they have in the surveillance vehicles in Katy, the cameras are mounted behind the rear view mirror, right? And I'll do a session where I'll show you tons of photos of these cameras, right? Different vehicles. But it doesn't matter. Like there's cars that are 20 years old and they have these arrays of cameras mounted behind the rear view mirror, and they look very much like the Tesla cameras. And they're mounted in a way that, the array is positioned against the windshield, and it has kind of a tinted, the thing that is surrounding, the area that is surrounding the camera is tinted like as if it was a tinted window. Like, how the windshields on the top, most of them, or I don't know if this is still the case, but some of the windshields, right, from the factory, they have kind of a blue shade on top. It looks something like that, but it's darker. It's not blue, it's like more like black. And the camera is mounted in a way that that black area makes it very difficult to see. But if you look at the camera being in front of the car, it looks very much like a Tesla camera. The shape is the same. What changes is the size, right? So that, the first thought that I had is that maybe that thing that they mount in those cars, which is a modification, right? Because why? Well, because what I'm saying, right? It's to be able to industrialize it, they have to package it, right? And the best way to package it is build a device that you can quickly install or remove from a car, right? So this device is basically in the base of the rear view mirror or in the upper console. You know how some cars have a console on the ceiling that has kind of buttons for lights, and some of them have kind of a compartment where you can put your sunglasses or your garage opener. You know, it's like a console. I don't know what's the word to call that, but some of these vehicles have that mounted in that console, right on the back of that console. So the reason why they need to do it that way is for the same reason I was explaining before, right? The same thing that I do is what they did 25 years ago, right? So they thought of a way to package this technology so they could deploy it in any car, right? Regardless of the market, regardless of the localization problems, if it's winter, if it's a hot climate, like they can deploy this thing anywhere, right? And the best way is to create a device that you can mount or unmount very quickly. The reason why I'm saying all this, right? I'm giving all this story because this is something that could be traceable, right? There could be a huge footprint and it could be a huge weakness. I don't know, right? I don't have the way to check, but I'm going to give you the idea, right? And I imagine authorities, if they are looking into this, they probably already know all this, right? But I'm going to take a leap and say it. So imagine for a second that, I mean, the hypothesis that I have is that because if they're using LiDAR in Tesla, right, to map the environment, it makes sense to do it here as well. And it would be a super powerful tool because it would allow them to measure the distance in between that windshield and the next car, right? Which they need to be able to map the environment, right? And to be able to compute the time of arrival of the signals, right? They need to be able to map 3D the space. And imagine the power it would give you. Imagine that you're this network, right? If you had in one city 10,000 cars being able to map with LiDAR 180 degrees in front of each car for 30 meters, right? And you have 10,000 cars. You basically would have a 3D map of the city, basically. And you can adapt it. You can move the cars as you want and map anything 3D real time. I mean, this would be, I mean, imagine the power, the tactical advantage that will give you in any scenario. Right? So I imagine that thing has a LiDAR. Right? That's my hypothesis. I cannot prove it, but I imagine it's probably if I had access to be able to buy things freely, I would get something that would allow me to detect that frequency, right? But I don't have it. Anyhow, the thought is that if this thing has a LiDAR, assume that for a second, right? I don't know if that's the case, but if it does have a LiDAR, I mean, I'm talking about these devices that they mount on these cars easily, right? And they can turn any vehicle into a sophisticated surveillance machine this way. Because of the same reason that the informant told me that the windshield was designed by Tesla to let pass that frequency, it would mean that this cannot be mounted on any car. This needs to be mounted on a car that has a windshield that has been especially made for this, or at least especially coated or treated in a way that would let pass this frequency. So if that's the case, and I know it's a lot of ifs, right? But if that turns out to be the case, the supply chain of those windshields is an easy way to detect them, right? So the cars that have installed these special windshields are cars that are fitted to work with this advanced machine, right? That they have. Um, and looking at the shape of the thing, right, of the device, I mean, I guess there's different ways to do it, right? When you mount the device, you could also mount the film, right, to make it covered, so people cannot see from that side that it's a camera, or they cannot easily see that it's a camera. Um, but the other option is that the windshields are customized, right? But again, if I see it from the industrialization angle, from the standardization angle, I would think that it's a film, right? Because it would be more difficult to replace all these windshields, right? I mean, for the amount of resources they have, it's nothing, right? But it would be something that could be detected. Um, I don't know if it's related, right? But one thing that happened that was interesting is that at some point in 2013, I bought a car, right? And it was a Mercedes, an SLK 300, I think. And shortly after I bought it, the windshield cracked. Right? I don't know, maybe it was a coincidence, right? But maybe it was a way to make me replace the windshield, right? To make this thing work. I don't know. This conversation reminded me that I had a car once that shortly after I bought it secondhand. But shortly after I bought it, I had to replace the windshield. So I don't know. But you know, it's a lead, right? Obviously, you know, research and thought has to go into this. But it's another example of, you know, when you know who the creator is, this is like the reverse path, right? In this case, knowing who the creators are, we can guess, you know, what the device probably contains. You know, these visionaries, right, of self-driving are always talking about LiDAR and computer vision to solve this full self-driving problem, right? So, you know, if I had to guess, I would guess that that device has a LiDAR or multiple LiDARs in it. But anyhow, you know, I inadvertently got into the technical topics which I was trying to avoid. So I apologize for that. But the important thing that the informant told me regarding the Tesla is that basically they co-opted the already installed LiDAR, and it was a software modification. So I don't know. And the other important topic about that black Tesla is that they did deprive me, right? They did deprive me from the ownership of the car by using a fraudulent document and electronic wire communication, interstate probably, right? So it's possible that the Tesla is the key, right? Yes. Let me review here to see if I have something else today. Yeah. No. Well. So you know, the other important thing, you know, that the hearing was really at 9 a.m. But the judge said that it was actually at 1:30 p.m. And then I got there at 1:30 p.m. and he was having another hearing for another divorce, I think. And you know, the petitioner nor the lawyers were there. But the informant told me that if I had not gone, they would have put this in motion. And he warned me yesterday that they were going to shut down the Tesla. So that's why this morning, and I'm saying this because they know, right? Like they saw that I switch cars in the morning. The logical thing for me to do would have been to take the Tesla because the Tesla has the newer setup already mounted. So that makes it for me better, right? Because I can be scanning things as I'm traveling to the court. But I switch cars in the morning, right? So they must already know that I was warned about what they were going to do. So that's why I'm saying. And the other explosive tip was that the picket was in the proximity of the court, just waiting to see if I did not show up for one of the two times that they put in the docket. So the current status on the legal front is that the orders officially expired today, November 10th. There's no written orders because the orders that Piquet filed in that document on November 7th, those are that's a fraudulent document. Like any way you say it, right? So today, in response, I filed a motion to strike that document and ask the administrative judge to protect the child by entering a standard orders, right? Which is what should have happened in April. So we're waiting for the administrative judge to review this and take action. So with that, I'm going to leave you for today and I'll see you again tomorrow. Thank you so much and have a good night.